You see, it starts like a whisper in the corner of a crowded room. No one hears it, no one listens, but the whisper grows, it crawls, it slithers, it blooms in silence, and by the time you notice Ito, it's already in your bloodstream. People laugh, people shrug. They think it's just a moment, a phase, a passing cloud. But clouds become storms. Storms flood cities. Cities fall. This is not a pebble in your shoe. This is a crack in the foundation. And once the foundation cracks, do you know what happens? Everything you built, every step you took, begins to tremble. Collapse isn't sudden, it's slow, it's silent, and then snap, the floor is gone. Having this is not just heavy. It's magnetic. It pulls everything toward it. Your peace, your clarity, your choices. And it does not ask for permission. People say, "Oh, I'll deal with it later." Later is the myth we tell ourselves while the fire creeps up the stairs. Later is how we die without knowing we've already been buried. Having this is serious, like a siren with no sound, like a shadow that doesn't follow but leads. You carry it, yes, but it also carries you to places you never meant to go. Into rooms with no exits, into mirrors you don't recognize, into decisions that are already made before you speak. And still, some dare to call it small. They dare to call it manageable. But a rope doesn't strangle in one motion. It wraps. Coil by coil, smile by smile. Having this is very serious. Not because it's loud, not because it's dramatic, but because it's patient, it waits. And while you sleep it studies you. Having this is not just something you have. It's something that has you. It begins subtly, but grows dangerously over time. This is the kind of presence that does not announce itself with fanfare or drama. It doesn't knock at the door or demand your attention. Instead, it seeps in, like the first chill of winter drifting in through a cracked window. You may not even notice it at first. A passing thought, a flicker of unease, a sense that something is not quite right. You dismiss it. You go about your day. You rationalize it away. That's what it wants. You tell yourself it's just tiredness, just stress, just the weather. But beneath those excuses, it's already at work. It's already forming. You carry on because life is busy and distractions are plenty. And while you're scrolling, talking, laughing, pretending, it's watching, it's learning. It feeds not on your fear, but on your indifference. Because the greatest trick it plays is convincing you that it's not there at all. It might start with a small hesitation, a missed call you don't return, a conversation you avoid, a project you delay. Nothing big, nothing catastrophic, but each time you say it's nothing, it becomes something, it gains weight, it gains shape, it roots itself deeper, and your silence is the water it needs. This thing, this presence, is not a sudden storm. It is a slow drip, a faucet you never fixed, a leak behind the wall. It's not enough to ruin the house in a day, but give it time. Give it the benefit of your neglect, and one day the paint will bubble, the wood will warp, and the ceiling will fall. Not because it shouted, not because it demanded, but because it waited. That's the danger, that's the terror. It is not bold, it is not explosive, it is insidious. It evolves in the background of your life, wearing a mask of normalcy. And while you live your moments, it builds its foundation. While you make your plans, it lays its trap. Sometimes it even disguises itself as comfort. It tells you not to push yourself today, to rest just a little longer, to hide from that conversation, to not check that message, to let the small things slide, just this once, and again, and again, and again, until you can't remember the last time you stood up to it. You begin to adjust to its presence, the way you adjust to a limp or bad lighting. You live around it. You plan with it in mind. You start rearranging your world to accommodate something you once claimed wasn't even real. And now it's in your habits. Now it's in your decisions. Now it's in your breath. You may not feel it growing, because growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a tightening, a narrowing of your choices, a shrinking of your confidence, a silence after your name is called. The world gets quieter, but your thoughts get louder, and somehow you've come to believe that's normal. Friends might notice something's changed, but you'll have 1,000 justifications. You'll say you're busy, you're tired, you're focused, you're fine, and they'll nod because that's easier than pushing. That's easier than naming what you won't name, so it grows unchecked because it knows people don't like to look closely at what makes them uncomfortable. It knows that silence is its shield, even when cracks begin to show. When you forget things, miss appointments, flinch at kindness, you'll find ways to patch them. You'll smile, you'll overcompensate, you'll call it a rough patch. But rough patches don't last this long, and patches don't hold forever. It thrives in the spaces between your attention. It needs you to stay distracted. That's why it doesn't rush. That's why it doesn't roar. It prefers the lullaby, the soft comfort of denial, and so, while you sleep, it sharpens. While you celebrate, it prepares. It's never idle, even when you are. You might think you can control it, that you're stronger than it. But you're not dealing with something that wants to fight. You're dealing with something that wants to wait. It's not a battle, it's an erosion. And you cannot fight erosion by being stronger. You fight it by noticing it before it begins. But most people don't. Most people only notice when it's far too late, when the tide has already swept away the shoreline, when the rot has reached the beam, when the silence in your heart becomes louder than any noise outside of you. And even then, they question themselves. They wonder how it happened, how it got this far, as if it wasn't always there, as if they didn't invite it in with every shrug, every excuse, every ignored sign. That's why this is dangerous. That's why this is serious, because it begins like nothing, because it's born from moments too small to remember, and yet, in the end, it becomes everything. When you finally realize its full weight, when you finally try to turn and face it, you discover that it has no single form. It's not a wound you can bandage or a door you can close. It's 100 little things, 1,000 little choices. It's woven into your routines, your reflexes, your very sense of self. To remove it is not to pluck a weed. It is to unlearn parts of yourself, and that terrifies people. So most don't try. Most keep feeding it in secret. They pretend not to notice. They pretend not to feel its hands on their throat, and they become hosts. Hosts to something they never meant to keep. Something they never meant to love. But it grew because they let it. You cannot ignore what whispers. You cannot outrun what watches, and you cannot fight what waits. It begins subtly, yes, but that's what makes it so dangerous. Because when you finally realize it's there, it has already become a part of you. Neglecting it leads to gradual internal collapse, not the kind that happens all at once with dramatic cracks and falling ceilings, but the kind that creeps in silence, like rust under the paint or mold in the corners. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but it's there, working patiently, devouring slowly, rewiring everything from the inside out. The outside, for a while, stays the same, intact, polished, convincing. But within, the structure begins to warp. It starts when you stop asking questions, when you accept the weight on your chest as just part of waking up, when you normalize the tightness in your throat, the hesitation in your hand, the echo in your thoughts. You convince yourself this is how things are now, this is adulthood, this is pressure, this is life, so you don't question, you just adjust, you bend a little, you compromise a little, and with each bend something breaks even if it doesn't scream. You get quieter, not because you have less to say, but because you're afraid your voice might shake. You withdraw, not because you dislike people, but because pretending you're okay around them is exhausting. You delay, not because you're lazy, but because every task now feels heavier than it should. It's like walking through water with weights tied to your ankles, and the worst part is no one else sees them. There are no alarms. There's no one moment where it all shatters. That's not how this works. It's subtle, like a long, slow fade. One day you stop doing the things that once brought you joy. You think you're just busy. Then you realize you can't remember the last time you laughed without faking it. You lose track of time, not because you're careless, but because your days have blurred into gray sameness, morning, night. Repeat, repeat, repeat. The collapse doesn't feel like an explosion. It feels like vanishing. Neglect is an artist of disguise. It doesn't enter your life with red flags. It comes dressed as routine. As harmless delay, as harmless silence. You tell yourself you'll deal with it tomorrow, next week, when things calm down. But when things calm down, never comes. Because life never stops moving, and neglect thrives in movement without direction. So you keep going, keep pushing, keep ignoring. People may still think you're functioning, that you're showing up, that you're present, but they don't see how much energy it takes just to be there. They don't see the countless internal battles you lose just to look like you're fine. You learn how to fake stability so well that even you forget it's fake. But deep down, you know something's not right. That knowing is part of the collapse. Because once your mind and your reality no longer match, the tension begins. You know you need rest, but you don't rest. You know you need to talk, but you stay silent. You know you need help, but you refuse to ask. And this dissonance, this daily betrayal of your own needs, becomes a form of self-harm. Not with blades or bruises, but with neglect. Your internal compass begins to glitch. You stop trusting your own instincts. You question your choices. You overthink every move, not out of caution, but because you no longer trust that you can handle the consequences. You spiral quietly, privately, in the spaces between conversations, in the pauses between responsibilities. That's where the collapse lives. In the pauses, you begin to lose the ability to feel things deeply. You might still cry, but it feels empty. You might still smile, but it feels mechanical. Emotions become shadows, there, but not whole. It's as if someone dimmed the light inside you and left the room. You want to fix it, but you don't know where the switch is anymore. Neglect is not just the absence of care. It's the slow, systematic unraveling of connection. Connection to others, yes, but more importantly, connection to yourself. Your body sends signals, but you don't listen. Your mind cries for stillness, but you drown it in noise. Your heart asks for truth, but you keep telling it to wait. That's the most dangerous part of all. You begin to adapt, to find ways to carry the pain without facing it. You build workarounds, you create distractions, you develop routines not out of ambition, but as survival mechanisms. You make yourself busy, not to grow, but to avoid. And with each day you ignore the root, the rot spreads. You forget what it felt like to feel whole. And over time, you convince yourself you never were, that this fractured, exhausted, numbed version of you is the real you. That's the final trick of neglect. It rewrites your story. It tells you that healing is unrealistic, that hope is childish, that effort is wasted, and because you're so tired, you believe it. The collapse isn't visible to the world. You still make it to work, you still return texts, you still show up to dinner, but you leave parts of yourself behind in each interaction. You're there, but you're not there. You're not fully inhabiting your own life. It's like watching yourself through a pane of glass, close enough to see, too distant to touch. It affects your sleep. You're tired, but you can't rest. You lie in bed while your mind loops old regrets, future fears, unfinished conversations. You become haunted by the things you've neglected, the undone tasks, the unspoken truths, the unread signals. They gather in your silence like dust in forgotten corners. And eventually, the weight of what you're not doing becomes heavier than anything you actually do. Neglect does not scream for your attention. It waits, it accumulates, and eventually it changes your chemistry. Your identity becomes tangled with it. It's not just something you're going through. It becomes who you are. And then breaking free isn't just about fixing habits. It's about dismantling an entire identity. That's not a quick process. That's not a weekend project. That's a full-scale reconstruction. People don't see the collapse coming because we're taught to reward resilience over recovery. We admire those who carry on, who push through, who don't complain. But sometimes pushing through is the most dangerous thing you can do. Because every time you push through something that needs healing, you drive the damage deeper. Neglect makes you brittle. On the outside, you seem solid, capable, but inside, your foundations are cracking, your support beams are splitting, and it only takes one more thing, one unexpected phone call, one argument, one bad day, for everything to come crashing down. People call it an overreaction. They say, "Why did that little thing affect you so much?" But it's never about that little thing. It's about the 100 little things that came before it. You don't just wake up one day unable to cope. You erode into it, like a coastline slowly devoured by waves. Every ignored feeling is a wave, every buried thought a current, and you are the cliff, pretending you can stand forever. You become prone to extremes. Overeating or not eating at all, sleeping too much or not sleeping at all, lashing out or shutting down because you're trying to find balance with a broken scale. You're compensating for needs you've ignored so long you can't even name them anymore. And those around you might not understand. They may judge, they may distance themselves, and in that distance your collapse deepens. You internalize the neglect. You start to believe you deserve it. You think, if I mattered more, I would have taken better care of myself. But that's not how this works. Neglect isn't about worth. It's about disconnection. And when you've been disconnected long enough, even your own pain starts to feel like background noise. You might try to reach out, a vague text, a half-hearted confession, but when the collapse is deep, even asking for help feels performative. You question whether you're being dramatic, whether it's even worth saying, whether anyone will care. And the longer you wait, the more certain you become that silence is safer. That's the paradox. The more you collapse internally, the more normal it starts to feel. You lose your frame of reference. You don't remember what it felt like to feel strong. So even weakness becomes familiar. And we choose familiar pain over unfamiliar healing every time. That's how powerful neglect can be. You think you're coping, but really you're surviving, and survival is not the same as living. Survival is bare minimum. It's functioning without feeling, moving without meaning, and over time, that state of existence becomes indistinguishable from death. Not of the body, but of the self. That is the danger of neglect. Not that it shouts, but that it whispers. Not that it ends you, but that it rewrites you. Until one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. Not because you've changed, but because you've disappeared. When it begins to show, it doesn't knock first. It doesn't clear its throat before entering. It creeps, it leaks, it oozes through the cracks you didn't even realize were open. The ones you've been patching for months with fake smiles, polite nods, workaholic distractions, short replies, late night overthinking, and all the other quiet performances you learned to rely on. But those cracks were never gone. They were waiting for the right pressure, the right moment, the right tilt of the world to give way. And when it shows, it doesn't care where you are. It doesn't check to see if you're in a meeting or standing in a grocery store aisle or sitting across from someone who has no idea you're not okay. It just shows, like a sudden storm without warning skies. And there you are, soaked in a feeling you can't explain, choking on something you didn't swallow, blinking too fast because if your eyes slow down, the tears will catch up. You try to push it down, like you've done before, but this time it pushes back. You start to notice you can't hide it as well anymore. Your tone slips, your laugh lands wrong, your responses have this delay that wasn't there before, like your brain is buffering, trying to catch up with the present moment. People begin to ask if you're tired, if you're stressed, if everything is okay. And you smile, nod, offer the safe responses. Because what are you going to say? That you're unraveling, that every part of you feels like a tightrope walk over a foggy pit of who knows what? The worst part isn't that others start noticing. It's that you start noticing that you can't fake it as well anymore. That the mask you wore with such ease is now heavy, misaligned, slipping, and the more it slips, the more you panic. Because behind that mask, you're not sure what's left. You've spent so long curating the image, the posture, the rhythm, that now, when the facade begins to falter, you feel exposed in a way that language can't soften. You hear yourself say things you never used to say. I don't care anymore. It's whatever. I just need to get through today. These aren't phrases of resilience. They're phrases of erosion. They're the language of someone losing touch with their own aliveness. And when others hear it, they might chuckle, they might nod, because to them, it sounds like everyday burnout. But to you, it's deeper, it's darker. It's not about stress anymore. It's about the slow disappearance of your spark. You begin to isolate, not out of dislike, but out of defense. Because being around people requires energy you don't have. It requires a version of you that you can't summon on command anymore. So you cancel plans. You ghost conversations. You let messages sit unread. Not because you're cold, but because you can't figure out how to be warm when there's a chill inside you that even sleep can't shake. And sleep itself becomes strange. Either it evades you or swallows you. There's no middle ground, just extremes. Routine things feel mountainous. Showering, cooking, responding to an email. Your hands move slow. Your thoughts come with static. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you're disorganized. It's that everything requires emotional bandwidth, and yours has run dry. You think you're managing, but really, you're running on fumes and habits. And eventually, even those wear thin. People say you seem distracted, but it's not distraction. It's dissociation. Your body is there, but your mind floats. It drifts between old memories and future fears and anxious rehearsals of conversations you may never even have. You try to anchor yourself, but the weight is missing. You try to breathe deep, but your chest is tight. It's like your nervous system is on edge, constantly bracing for a wave that may or may not come. When you try to explain it, you stumble, because it's hard to describe something that feels invisible and everywhere at once. You say, I'm just tired, because I'm not okay, feels too dramatic. You say, I've been busy, because I've been breaking, would make people uncomfortable. You shrink your truth into palatable pieces. You sanitize your distress, and in doing so, you deny yourself the dignity of being seen fully. But still, it shows in how you zone out during conversations, in how your jokes come with a bitter edge, in how you avoid mirrors, not because of vanity, but because looking at yourself means facing what you've been ignoring. It shows in the way your joy feels flat, in the way you skip songs that once moved you, in the way everything feels slightly off key, like a piano that hasn't been tuned in years. The mask begins to crack in unexpected places. You snap at someone over something small. You forget things you normally wouldn't. You cry without warning at something meaningless. You scroll endlessly, not to engage, but to escape. You overeat or stop eating. You drink too much coffee, then wonder why you're anxious. You make impulsive decisions, not out of freedom, but out of desperation for any kind of feeling other than numb. And you know people mean well when they offer advice. Take a day off, go for a walk. Just think positive, but their solutions feel like band-aids on a leaking dam because they don't see the whole picture. They don't see how long you've been holding yourself together with duct tape and hope. They don't see that the showing isn't sudden. It's the result of years, maybe decades, of quietly folding in on yourself. You wonder if it's weakness, if you're failing, if you should be stronger, but deep down, you know it's not about strength. It's about capacity, and yours has been overdrawn for too long. You've been giving from a well that hasn't been filled, and now the emptiness echoes. The showing isn't an event, it's a process, a slow peeling back of the layers you wrapped around your pain. It's your body finally refusing to cooperate with your denial. It's your heart demanding to be felt, not managed. It's your mind rebelling against the lie that everything is fine. And yes, it's messy. And yes, it's terrifying, but in that showing, there is also truth. You might begin to speak differently, more honestly, less performative. You start saying things like, I don't have the energy, or I need space, or I'm not okay right now. And though these admissions feel risky, they are signs that something inside you is tired of pretending. That even in your unraveling, there's a part of you reaching for something real. Others might not get it. They might misread your showing as moodiness, as selfishness, as drama. But that's because they're seeing the tip of the iceberg. They don't know the weight you've carried, the years you've worn your pain like armor. They don't know that this showing isn't weakness, it's the cost of silence finally due, and the showing, while painful, is necessary, because things cannot heal in hiding. What festers in the dark must be brought to light. But the light is harsh at first. It exposes everything you've tried to protect, everything you've avoided, and that exposure can feel like a second collapse. You think, wasn't the fall enough? Now I have to look at the wreckage too. Yes. Because only by seeing the damage can you begin to understand it, and only by understanding it can you begin to mend it. You may notice moments of clarity within the mess, a sudden awareness of how deeply you've neglected yourself, a realization that you don't remember the last time you felt safe, in your body, your mind, your space. These insights don't come with solutions, but they do come with permission. Permission to stop pretending, to stop minimizing, to stop gaslighting yourself into silence. The showing is scary, but it's not betrayal. It's your system saying enough. Enough dissociation, enough numbing, enough denial. It's the alarm going off in the burning building. And while alarms are loud and jarring, they're also the first step to survival. You can't put out a fire if you won't admit it's burning. So you begin to speak, tentatively, quietly, maybe only to yourself at first. You name the things you've buried, you let them breathe, you let them sting, and slowly you remember what it's like to be honest, not polished, not palatable, just honest. The showing doesn't mean everything falls apart, but it does mean you can't go back to how things were. Because once you've seen the truth in your own unraveling, you can't pretend the mask fits anymore. You can't unread the signals your body gave you. You can't unfeel the ache of being unseen, and that's not a bad thing. It's a beginning, a painful, messy, terrifying beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. When it finally happens, there's a sound to it. Not a bang or a crash, but something quieter, something more familiar. Like a sigh, like a breath you didn't know you were holding, like the slow, hesitant creak of a door you never dared open. And what comes through that door isn't what you expected. It's not redemption. It's not relief. It's reality, stark, unfiltered, and heavier than you thought it would be. Because the moment it all begins to collapse, you realize it never truly stood solid in the first place. It was a balancing act, a performance held together by repetition, illusion, and the pressure to appear fine. You start to understand that collapse isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the soft disintegration of all the things you convinced yourself were true. The belief that you had it under control, the idea that if you just kept going, it would all work out, the lie that you were supposed to carry it all quietly, proudly, without asking for help. And when those ideas fall apart, it's not with drama, it's with detachment. One by one, you let go of the roles you played, the expectations you adopted, the people you kept chasing to prove your worth. It doesn't come with a plan. Collapse doesn't arrive with an itinerary or a set of instructions. It just happens. Sometimes it's a moment. Other times it's a series of moments stretched so thin they blur into a kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones. You forget what day it is. You lose track of time, not because you're distracted, but because nothing feels distinct. Everything bleeds into everything else. Morning feels like night. Minutes feel like hours. You begin to live in pauses. Pauses between responsibilities. Pauses between conversations. Pauses between you and the version of yourself you're still trying to remember. People tell you to stay positive. They tell you to hang in there, but hanging in where exactly? The rope snapped a long time ago and no one noticed. You've been free, falling in slow motion, pretending it's a dance. But your arms are tired, your mind is foggy, and every attempt to keep up appearances feels like trying to glue together smoke. Nothing sticks, nothing holds, and in the stillness of collapse, the truth becomes undeniable. You are not okay, and you haven't been for a long time. You become hyper, aware of the contradictions. You smile, but it doesn't reach your eyes. You laugh, but it doesn't reach your chest. You say you're fine, but your body screams otherwise. Your sleep is broken. Your appetite swings. You feel everything and nothing in the same breath, and still you get up, still you show up, still you go through the motions, not because you're strong, but because stopping feels like an admission you're not ready to make. You keep checking your phone hoping for a message you can't name. You scroll not for connection but for distraction. You open and close apps, chasing a sense of stimulation that never comes. You drink more coffee. You cancel more plans. You isolate because silence feels safer than the burden of explaining. And yet, you ache for someone to notice, not to fix you, not to advise you, but to see you. To really see that behind your silence, there's a person unraveling in plain sight. Collapse teaches you strange things. It teaches you that survival doesn't always look brave. Sometimes it looks like brushing your teeth after 3 days. Sometimes it looks like crying in the bathroom at work, and then walking out with a practiced smile. Sometimes it looks like staring at a blank screen, unable to type a single word, not because you have nothing to say, but because your brain is a crowded room with no exits. It teaches you that healing doesn't always come in beautiful packaging. Sometimes it looks like numbness, sometimes it sounds like I don't know, sometimes it feels like failure, even though it's the first step toward being honest. You begin to grieve things you didn't even realize you lost. Not just people or places, but versions of yourself, the enthusiastic self, the hopeful self, the self who believed in fresh starts and clean slates. You grieve the energy you used to have, the spontaneity, the creativity. You grieve a kind of inner aliveness that now feels like a distant memory. And in that grief, you start to realize that collapse is not an ending. It's a confrontation with all the parts of you that you've buried, with all the truths you've softened, with all the compromises you made in the name of peace that only led to inner war. There's a moment during collapse that feels like floating, not in a freeing way, but in a detached, hollow way. You see the world moving, but you're not in it. You hear conversations, but they pass through you. You watch people laugh, love, argue, leave, and you wonder when you stop doing those things for real. You start questioning everything, your job, your relationships, your purpose. You stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m., not because you're restless, but because sleep feels foreign, and in the silence, the thoughts come like a flood. You don't even know where they begin or end. They're just there, circling, spinning, repeating. Your body feels heavier. Movements feel mechanical. Your voice sounds unfamiliar to your own ears. You look in the mirror and try to smile, but the face staring back at you doesn't flinch. You've become a stranger to yourself, and that's perhaps the most jarring part of collapse. Not the pain, but the disconnection. The feeling that you're watching your own life from a distance, unable to step back into it. You try to find anchors, music, books, conversations, memories. Sometimes they help, most times they don't. You begin to redefine what strength looks like, not as productivity, but as persistence, not as achievement, but as honesty, not as pushing through, but as allowing yourself to fall without shame. Because you finally realize the world doesn't hand out awards for pretending. No one's going to applaud your silence. No one's going to medal your emotional suppression. And so, little by little, you stop performing. You lower your expectations, not because you're giving up, but because you're learning to live without the pressure of perfection. You stop trying to impress people who never cared to understand you. You stop chasing validation that always felt conditional. You start prioritizing your peace over your image. And in those quiet choices, you begin to recover parts of yourself you thought were gone forever. But recovery isn't clean. It doesn't follow a straight path. It's clumsy, inconsistent, and often invisible to others. One day you might feel okay. The next day you can't get out of bed. One week you might journal, eat well, reach out. The next week, you're numb, irritable, and shut down. You learn that healing isn't linear. It's circular. It comes in waves. And just when you think you're finally okay, another memory, another trigger, another spiral pulls you under again. But this time, you know how to breathe underwater a little better. People may still not understand. They may still tell you to cheer up, to be grateful, to think positive. But by now, you've stopped listening to surface-level advice. You know that what you're going through can't be fixed with mantras or mood boards. You know that it takes work, real, uncomfortable internal work. It takes rewriting old narratives. It takes facing the ghosts in your closet. It takes acknowledging your limits without guilt. And it takes learning how to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. You begin to notice small things again, the way sunlight lands on your floor, the smell of your morning coffee, the texture of your bed sheets. These moments don't cure you, but they remind you that beauty still exists, even in the rubble. And for now, that's enough. Not a solution, but a start. Not a fix, but a flicker, and you cling to that flicker, not with desperation, but with quiet reverence, because you know how dark it's been. You know how deep the hole went. You know how long you've been clawing your way out. And while you're not fully back yet, you're no longer sinking. You're no longer pretending. You're no longer shaming yourself for struggling. And in that, there is something sacred, something powerful. Something real. Collapse didn't break you, it revealed you. It peeled away the layers you thought you needed and exposed the core of who you are. Raw, real, resilient in ways that have nothing to do with toughness and everything to do with tenderness. And that, in itself, is the beginning of becoming whole.